At the Galactic Military Academy on Station Kepler-7, the common area buzzed with excitement as cadets from dozens of species gathered after their tactical exercises. The room was a mixture of colors and forms, with beings of all shapes sharing space in surprising harmony. Crystalline entities floated near ceiling fixtures while reptilian cadets sprawled on heated platforms. Insectoid soldiers clicked and chittered in their corner while mammalian species occupied the central seating areas. Cadet Laura Mitchell sat near the window, her human frame small compared to many of her classmates. She had been at the academy for 18 months now, long enough to understand the rhythms of military life across the galaxy. Long enough to recognize the patterns that played out every evening during recreation time. The storytelling had already begun. My clutch sibling destroyed 4 enemy vessels before his shields even flickered. A Crevathi warrior named Threx boomed, his scaled chest puffing with pride. His species stood nearly 8 feet tall, with midnight blue scales that reflected the station lights. The battle hymns still echo through our home world in his honor. The gathered cadets responded with enthusiasm. Tails thumped against floors. Tentacles waved in appreciation. A chorus of approval in 20 different languages filled the air. A Vraxian cadet named Kelm rose next, his stocky frame moving to the center of the group. His people resembled armored bears, covered in thick plates that had evolved for combat. During the border conflicts, my den father held a canyon pass against 200 enemies for 3 full days. Alone. When reinforcements arrived, they found him standing atop a mountain of defeated foes, still singing the war chants of our ancestors. More cheers erupted. Even species who had no concept of vocal celebration managed to express their admiration through bioluminescent displays or harmonic resonances. This was normal. This was what happened every single evening. Every species in the galaxy seemed to carry the same need to share tales of martial glory. They spoke of famous generals from their home worlds, of ancient battles that shaped their civilizations, of personal family members who had distinguished themselves in combat. Military prowess was a source of pride that transcended cultural boundaries. Every species except one. Laura kept her eyes on her data pad, reviewing tomorrow's flight patterns. She had learned early in her academy tenure to stay quiet during these sessions. Her silence had become so normal that most cadets probably didn't even notice it anymore. But Instructor Velkys noticed. The Torvan instructor had been watching the human cadet for weeks. His species had huge compound eyes that missed very little, and his analytical mind had been trained for pattern recognition. Every other species at the academy participated eagerly in the evening storytelling. The humans never did. There were 12 human cadets currently enrolled at Kepler-7. Velkys had observed them all. Not one of them ever shared combat stories. Not one of them spoke of military traditions. Not one of them mentioned famous human warriors or celebrated battles. They simply sat quietly, offering polite attention to others but never contributing their own tales. It made no sense. Humans were not a minor species. Their military was substantial, their territory expansive. They had been involved in numerous conflicts over the past 2 centuries since joining the galactic community. They had won many of those conflicts decisively. Yet their cadets acted as though their species had no military history worth discussing. Velkys moved through the crowd, his 6 legs carrying him smoothly toward where Laura sat. The conversations continued around them, but he focused entirely on the human. "Cadet Mitchell," he said, his voice a pleasant humming sound that his translator rendered into clear standard. "May I ask you something?" Laura looked up, her brown eyes showing immediate wariness. "Of course, instructor. I have been curious about something for quite some time." Velkys settled his body into a resting position, bringing his head level with hers. "Every species here shares stories of their martial achievements. The Crevathi speak of their battle prowess. The Vraxians honor their warrior traditions. Even the peaceful Shimrath occasionally mention their defensive victories. But humans never participate in these exchanges. Why is that?" The conversations around them began to fade. Other cadets turned to listen. This was apparently a question many had wondered about but never directly asked. Laura's face had gone slightly pale. She set down her data pad carefully, as though buying time to formulate an answer. "We just prefer not to dwell on such things, instructor. Humans tend to be more forward-looking than past-focused when it comes to military matters." Kelm, her Vraxian roommate, moved closer. The two had become friends over the months, and he knew Laura well enough to recognize discomfort. But every species looks forward while honoring the past. It's not about dwelling. It's about remembering courage and strength. Surely humans have warriors worth celebrating? "We do," Laura said quietly. "We have many. Then why never speak of them? Threx asked, genuine curiosity in his rumbling voice. I have heard humans are formidable in combat. Your species has won conflicts against opponents with superior technology. Yet you act almost ashamed of your military history. Not ashamed, Laura corrected quickly. Then she paused, reconsidering her words. Or perhaps ashamed isn't quite the wrong word after all. The room had gone completely silent now. 30 cadets from 24 species all focused on the single human in their midst. Instructor Velkys leaned closer. Explain, please. Laura looked around at all the expectant faces. She saw curiosity there but also genuine friendship. These beings had trained beside her, studied with her, shared meals and jokes and the daily struggles of academy life. They deserved honesty. But some truths were not hers to share. The real answer, she said slowly, is classified. Confusion rippled through the group. Kelm tilted his massive head. Classified? What does that mean? Are human combat techniques secret? Some are, yes. But that's not what I mean. Laura stood, suddenly feeling like she needed to be on her feet. The reason humans don't discuss combat, don't boast about battles, don't share war stories like everyone else does, that reason is classified. Not just from other species. It's classified from most humans too. Velkys' compound eyes seemed to sharpen their focus. Are you saying there is information about human combat behavior that your own government restricts? Yes. Why would they do that? Laura met his gaze directly. When she spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper, but in the silent room every being heard her clearly. Because if other species knew the truth about what humans become during sustained combat, you would never trust us again. Maybe you would never let us near your worlds. Maybe you would classify us as a threat to be contained rather than allies to be welcomed. She picked up her data pad, preparing to leave. Some doors are better left closed, instructor. Some questions are better left unasked. She walked toward the exit, but Kelm called after her. Laura, wait. You're our friend. Whatever this is, it can't be that terrible. She paused at the doorway, looking back at the assembled cadets. Friends, yes. Comrades. People she trusted with her life in combat simulations and training exercises. I hope you're right, she said. I really do. But it's not my decision to make. Then she was gone, leaving behind a room full of cadets whose curiosity had just transformed into something much more intense. Instructor Velkys stood in the silence that followed, his analytical mind already working through the implications. Whatever secret humans were hiding about their combat nature, it was significant enough to require high-level classification. Significant enough to make an otherwise honest cadet deeply uncomfortable. He would file an inquiry with the human military liaison. Surely there was an explanation that could satisfy everyone's curiosity without compromising whatever security concerns existed. Surely the truth couldn't be as disturbing as Laura's reaction suggested. But as he composed the request in his mind, Velkys couldn't shake the memory of her final expression. She hadn't looked worried about revealing classified information. She had looked worried about what would happen when that information eventually came to light. She had looked almost apologetic. Instructor Velkys submitted his formal inquiry to the Human Military Liaison Office the following morning. He expected a routine response, perhaps some clarification about cultural differences or a simple explanation about human modesty. What he received instead was a denial stamp with a security designation he had never encountered before. The message was brief and entirely unhelpful. Request denied. Classification level, psychological warfare, restricted. No further information available to non-human personnel at this time. Velkys stared at the response for a long moment. In his 20 years of teaching at the Galactic Military Academy, he had never seen such a blunt refusal. Even classified tactical information usually came with some kind of sanitized explanation. This was simply a wall with no door. He was not the only one curious. Word of Laura's cryptic statement had spread through the academy like wildfire. By the afternoon, cadets from every species were talking about the mysterious human combat secret. The speculation grew wilder with each retelling. In the academy library, a group of students had gathered around the public access terminals. Threx was navigating through human military archives, his clawed fingers moving carefully over the holographic controls designed for more delicate appendages. Look at this, he said, pulling up a combat report from a human colony defense. The initial contact report is complete. Enemy force composition, human defensive positions, everything normal. But then here, where the actual fighting is described, whole sections are just gone. Kelm leaned over his shoulder, his bulk making the Crevathy look small by comparison. Redacted. It says the information has been removed for security purposes. Every detailed combat report is like this, added a Shimrath cadet named Piril, her crystalline form chiming softly as she moved. I have been searching for 2 hours. Anytime humans engage in extended combat operations, the reports become heavily edited. Brief skirmishes have full documentation, but anything lasting more than a few weeks has these gaps. Thrax pulled up another document. And they all have the same classification code. Berserker Protocol. Every single redacted section. The word hung in the air. Berserker. Even translated into standard, it carried weight. The ancient human term suggested a warrior who fought with uncontrolled fury, who felt no pain, who could not be stopped by normal means. Perhaps it is a weapon system, Pierre Whale suggested. Some kind of enhancement that they deploy in longer battles. Or a drug, Kelm said thoughtfully. Something that increases combat effectiveness but has side effects they wish to keep secret. Thrax shook his head. Then why classify it from their own people? Laura said most humans don't know about this. You don't hide weapon systems from your own population. A Torvin student named Shix, smaller than Instructor Velkis but with the same compound eyes, had been quietly working at another terminal. I found something. It is not much, but it is something. The others gathered around her screen. She had located a medical journal article from a human university, published 15 years earlier. The title read, Neurological Changes in Extended Combat Scenarios, a Preliminary Study. It is heavily technical, Shix said, but the abstract mentions significant alterations in brain activity among soldiers who experience continuous combat for more than 30 days. The researchers note that these changes are consistent with activation of primitive neural pathways. What does that mean? Thrax asked. I am not certain. Human neurology is not my specialty. But primitive pathways suggest something old, something from earlier in their evolution perhaps. Kelm read further into the article. It says the study was discontinued due to ethical concerns and that all data was transferred to military oversight. Another dead end. They spent hours searching, finding only fragments. A mention here of unusual behavior patterns. A note there about psychological screening requirements for human soldiers and prolonged deployments. A reference to mandatory rotation schedules that seem designed to prevent humans from staying in combat zones too long. Pieces of a puzzle but no complete picture. That evening, Kelm found Laura in their shared quarters. She was sitting on her bunk, staring at nothing in particular. The normally tidy room felt heavy with unspoken tension. Everyone is talking about it, Kelm said, settling his bulk onto his own reinforced bed. The Berserker Protocol. The redacted reports. What you said last night started something that will not stop. Laura sighed deeply. I know. I shouldn't have said anything. But you did. And now everyone wants to understand. Kelm's voice was gentle despite his species' naturally aggressive appearance. We are theorizing about secret weapons, chemical enhancements, band tactics. Is it any of those things? No. Then what? Laura was quiet for a long time. Outside their window, the Kepler-7 nebula painted the darkness in shades of purple and gold. Beautiful and distant and utterly unconcerned with the struggles of tiny beings on a space station. Do you know why humans have so many rules of engagement? Laura asked finally. Why our military has more ethical protocols than any other species? Why we have mandatory psychological evaluations and rotation schedules and all these restrictions on how we conduct warfare? I assumed it was cultural. Humans seem to value individual rights highly. That's part of it. But mostly it's insurance. She turned to look at her friend. Kelm, has your species ever had to protect other species from yourselves? The Vraxian considered this. I do not understand the question. Your people are warriors. You honor strength and courage. When you go into battle, you fight with pride and discipline. You follow your warrior codes. You are what you appear to be. Laura's hands twisted together in her lap. Humans aren't like that. What do you mean? I mean that the humans you see here, the ones you train with, the ones you consider friends, we're the civilized version. We're what humans are when everything is calm and controlled. But in sustained combat something changes. Something old wakes up. Kelm moved closer, concerned by the tremor in her voice. Laura, you are being cryptic again. I'm being honest, she said. As honest as I can be without violating security protocols. Those redacted sections in the combat reports? They're not hiding what humans do to the enemy. They're hiding what combat does to humans. I still do not understand. Laura stood and walked to the window. The classification isn't to protect human advantages. It's to protect other species from being afraid of us. Because if you knew what humans become after weeks of continuous fighting, if you saw how our psychology changes, how our behavior transforms, you wouldn't see us as allies anymore. You'd see us as something that needs to be controlled or contained. That cannot be true. I have known you for over a year. You are kind and honorable. I'm now, yes, here where everything is safe and structured. But put me in combat for 40 days straight and I wouldn't be the same person anymore. None of us would be. She pressed her hand against the cool window. There's a reason humans avoid prolonged wars, Kelm. It's not because we can't win them. It's because we're afraid of what we become when we do. Kelm wanted to argue, to insist that she was exaggerating. But he remembered her face last night, that look of genuine worry. And he remembered the classification code on Velkis's inquiry response. Psychological warfare restricted. Not weapons. Not tactics. Psychology. How bad is it? He asked quietly. Bad enough that the galaxy might reconsider letting humans join the military academy if they knew. Bad enough that my grandfather, who was a decorated war hero, never once spoke about his service. Bad enough that when he died, we found a letter he'd written that just said, "I'm sorry for what I became," over and over for 3 pages. Laura turned back to face him. Velkis filed his inquiry. That means this won't stay buried. Eventually, someone with enough authority will push for answers. And when those answers come, everything changes. Perhaps it will not be as bad as you think. Perhaps. Or perhaps you'll all realize that the friendly humans you've been training beside are one long deployment away from becoming something you don't recognize. Something that frightens even us. She left the room then, heading for the training facilities where she could lose herself in physical exercise. Kelm sat alone in the darkness, his mind working through everything she had said. Somewhere in human history was a secret dark enough to require classification from the galaxy. Dark enough to make an honest young cadet look haunted when discussing it. Dark enough that humans themselves seemed ashamed of it. The Berserker Protocol. Whatever it was, Kelm suspected they would all know soon enough. And he wasn't certain he wanted to anymore. The ambassador arrived 3 weeks after Instructor Velkis filed his inquiry. Her name was Catherine Reynolds, and she came with an entourage that included 2 military psychologists, a xenobiologist, and a security detail that seemed excessive for a simple academic visit. The entire senior staff of the Galactic Military Academy assembled in the main conference hall, along with military observers from 24 allied species. Laura sat in the back row with the other human cadets. She had been called to attend but not told why. Looking at Ambassador Reynolds's grim expression as she set up her presentation materials, Laura suspected she already knew. The ambassador was a tall woman with gray-streaked hair and the bearing of someone who had spent decades in difficult negotiations. She wore a formal diplomatic uniform, dark blue with minimal decorations. When she spoke, her voice carried the weight of someone delivering news she wished she didn't have to share. "Thank you all for gathering on short notice," she began. "I want to start by saying that what you're about to learn has been restricted information for good reasons. We are sharing it now because continued secrecy has become impossible and because our allies deserve honesty. But I warn you that this information is disturbing. It has caused 3 allied species to reconsider their military partnerships with humanity. It may change how you view the human cadets training among you." She paused, letting that sink in. In the audience, Kelm glanced back at Laura. She sat very still, her face carefully neutral. "You've been asking why humans don't boast about combat achievements," Reynolds continued. "Why we don't share war stories like other species. Why our military reports from extended conflicts are heavily redacted. The answer is simple and terrible. Humans don't discuss what we do in sustained combat because we're ashamed of what we become." The ambassador activated the holo display. A 3-dimensional image of a human brain appeared, rotating slowly. Different regions were highlighted in various colors. "This is a baseline human brain scan. Normal neurological activity for a healthy adult. Now let me introduce Dr. Nina Foster, who specializes in combat psychology and has studied this phenomenon for 15 years. A younger woman stepped forward. Dr. Foster had dark circles under her eyes and the look of someone who had seen things that cost her sleep. She gestured at the brain image. "The human brain evolved over millions of years," she said. "Different layers developed at different times. The newest parts handle logic, language, complex planning. The older parts, deep in the center, handle survival instincts, fight or flight responses, predator behaviors. In most situations, the newer parts stay in control. But under extreme, prolonged stress, something changes." She brought up a second brain scan beside the first. This one showed dramatically different activity patterns. Large sections that had been calm in the first image now blazed with red and orange indicators. This is the brain of a human soldier after 8 weeks of continuous combat operations. Notice the increased activity in the amygdala and hypothalamus. Notice the reduced activity in the prefrontal cortex. The logical, reasoning part of the brain is being suppressed while ancient survival systems activate. Instructor Velkes leaned forward in his seat. What does this mean in practical terms? Dr. Foster's expression darkened. It means the person essentially changes. Their personality, their decision-making, their entire psychological profile transforms. We call it the berserker state, named after ancient human warriors who were known for entering combat trances. She pulled up a new image, a chemical chart. During this state, the brain floods itself with specific neurotransmitters. Adrenaline remains elevated for days instead of minutes. Dopamine patterns change to reward aggressive behavior. The stress hormone cortisol reaches levels that would be toxic in normal circumstances, but somehow the body adapts. Pain sensitivity drops. Fear response diminishes. And most disturbing, the parts of the brain responsible for empathy and moral reasoning reduce their activity. A Shimrath observer in the front row chimed softly, their species' expression of distress. You are saying humans lose their conscience during extended combat? Not completely, but it becomes diminished, muted. Dr. Foster chose her words carefully. They retain enough awareness to distinguish friend from foe, to follow basic commands from superiors. But the person who enters this state is fundamentally different from the person who went into combat. Different priorities, different inhibitions, different capabilities. Ambassador Reynolds stepped forward again. Let me give you a concrete example. 15 years ago, a human colony world called New Perth was attacked by pirate raiders. The initial defense was handled exactly as you would expect. Professional soldiers following standard protocols. Measured force. Clear communication. Everything by the book. She pulled up a timeline. The conflict was supposed to last maybe 2 weeks. The pirates were well armed but outnumbered. However, they had fortified positions and kept fighting. Week 3. Week 4. Week 5. Our soldiers couldn't be rotated out because reinforcements couldn't get through the pirate blockade. By week 6, our military psychologists monitoring the situation began reporting concerning changes in the soldiers' behavior. Dr. Foster advanced the presentation to show a series of incident reports. Increased aggression toward the enemy. That was expected. But also increased risk-taking. Soldiers volunteering for suicide missions. Groups hunting enemy positions during their rest periods instead of sleeping. Communication becoming minimal, almost nonverbal. And most concerning, creative cruelty in their tactics. What does that mean? Threx asked from the audience. It means they started using psychological warfare without being ordered to do so, Reynolds said quietly. They started taking enemy equipment and arranging it in patterns designed to demoralize the pirates. They started calling out challenges over communication channels, taunting enemies into disadvantageous engagements. They stopped treating combat as a job and started treating it as something else. Something personal and primal. She pulled up a video file. This is helmet camera footage from week 7. I'm going to show you 30 seconds. That's all you need to understand. The video played. It showed human soldiers moving through a damaged building. Their movements were efficient but wrong somehow. Too focused. Too intense. One soldier cleared a room and eliminated 3 enemies in seconds, but the way he moved was more like a hunting animal than a trained professional. No wasted motion. No hesitation. No fear. The audio was worse. One soldier was humming. Just a simple tune, calm and cheerful, while moving through a combat zone. Dr. Foster stopped the video. That soldier humming? His name was Trevor Grant. Before deployment, he was a gentle person who volunteered at animal shelters. His psychological profile showed high empathy and strong moral reasoning. After 9 weeks of combat, he was humming children's songs while hunting enemy combatants through abandoned buildings. The room had gone completely silent. When the conflict finally ended at week 11, we had to keep those soldiers isolated for 2 weeks before allowing them contact with civilians. They had to be gradually reintegrated into normal society. Many of them couldn't remember details of their actions during the later weeks. They described it as being in a fog, operating on instinct, feeling disconnected from their own bodies. Ambassador Reynolds looked out at the assembled officers and cadets. Trevor Grant received medals for his service. He was a hero. He saved lives and completed his mission. But in his own words, recorded during his psychological debrief, he said, The person who did those things wasn't me. I watched him do it, but it wasn't me. And I'm terrified that he's still inside somewhere, waiting for the next time. She let that statement hang in the air. This is why humans don't boast about combat, Reynolds continued. Because we know what prolonged warfare does to us. We know that underneath our civilization, underneath our ethics and morals and carefully constructed society, there's something old and dangerous. We evolved as both predator and prey on a harsh world. That evolution left scars in our psychology. Under the right conditions, under enough stress, the predator wakes up. Dr. Foster added one more image to the display. It showed a comparison chart of multiple human soldiers across different conflicts. This isn't unique to New Perth. We've documented the berserker state in every prolonged conflict humans have been involved in for the last 2 centuries. It's consistent. It's predictable. And it's terrifying because we cannot fully control it. Kelm stood slowly. Can it be prevented? Only by avoiding the conditions that trigger it, Reynolds answered. This is why humans prefer short, decisive conflicts. Why we have mandatory rotation schedules. Why we have more psychological screening than any other species. We're not trying to optimize our combat effectiveness. We're trying to prevent our soldiers from staying in combat long enough to change. She looked directly at Kelm, then at Laura in the back row. We're not hiding a weapon. We're not concealing a tactical advantage. We're hiding what combat reveals about human nature. We're hiding the fact that civilization is a very thin layer over something much older and darker. Dr. Foster closed her presentation. There's more to show you. Combat footage from multiple engagements. Psychological interviews with affected soldiers. Neurological data spanning decades of research. But first, I need to know if you want to continue. Because once you see what humans actually become in sustained warfare, you cannot unsee it. And it will change how you view every human you've ever met. In the back row, Laura closed her eyes. She knew what was coming next. They all did now. The room remained silent, but Ambassador Reynolds could read the answer in their faces. They needed to know. They needed to understand. She nodded to Dr. Foster. Show them everything. Dr. Foster dimmed the conference hall lights. The hollow display expanded to fill the front wall, creating an immersive viewing space. She pulled up the first video file with hands that trembled slightly. Even after viewing these recordings dozens of times, they still affected her. This footage comes from a human marine unit defending a research station on Meridian 4, she said. The station was attacked by Krith raiders who wanted the classified research data stored there. The conflict lasted 47 days. What you're about to see is compiled from helmet cameras, station security feeds, and drone surveillance. I'm going to show you week 1 first. The video began. 6 human marines moved through a corridor in standard tactical formation. Their movements were precise and professional. They communicated in clear, calm voices. Contact left, 2 targets. Confirmed. Engaging. Target down. Advancing. They cleared rooms methodically. When they encountered enemies, they neutralized them efficiently and moved on. Their faces, visible through the helmet cameras, showed focus and concentration but nothing unusual. These were trained soldiers doing their jobs exactly as they had been taught. One Marine paused to check on a wounded comrade. Stevens is hit. Not critical, but he needs medical. Fall back to checkpoint 3. We'll cover you. The team adjusted their formation to protect the injured Marine as they withdrew to a safe position. Professional. Disciplined. Exactly what you would expect from any competent military force. Dr. Foster stopped the video. Now I'm going to show you the same unit in week 8 of the same conflict. The new footage began and immediately something felt wrong. The Marines moved through a damaged section of the station, but their formation had changed. It was tighter, more aggressive. They advanced without the cautious clearing patterns from the earlier video. The communication had changed too. 3 ahead. Moving. That was it. 2-word exchanges. No acknowledgements. No status updates. Just minimal necessary information delivered in flat, emotionless tones. They encountered the enemy and the difference became shocking. Where the week 1 footage showed controlled engagement, this showed something else entirely. The Marines moved with frightening speed and precision. One soldier cleared a room by himself in seconds, eliminating 4 enemies before they could react. His movements were less like trained tactics and more like a predator taking down prey. The helmet camera showed his face briefly in a reflection. His expression was completely blank. Empty eyes. No fear. No anger. Nothing. Another Marine was humming. The sound came through clearly on the audio feed. A simple, cheerful tune that clashed horribly with the violence happening around him. He hummed while reloading. Hummed while advancing. Hummed while stepping over enemy bodies. "Stop the video," Instructor Velke said suddenly. "Go back. Show that last sequence again." Dr. Foster complied. The sequence showed two Marines pursuing retreating enemies down a corridor. The enemies were clearly trying to disengage, running toward an exit. The Marines chased them with single-minded intensity, ignoring cover, ignoring tactics, just running them down like wolves chasing deer. "They're not following any defensive protocol," Velkes observed. "They're completely exposed to counterattack." "They don't care," Dr. Foster said simply. "By week 8, the normal self-preservation instincts have been overridden. The only thing that matters is stopping the enemy. Their own safety becomes secondary." She played more footage. A scene showing Marines working in shifts, and even during rest periods, several soldiers sat facing the direction of enemy territory, watching, waiting. They barely ate, barely slept. Just maintained this constant vigilance like guard dogs that couldn't relax. The next clip showed something that made several observers recoil. The Marines had arranged captured enemy equipment in the corridors leading to their positions. Weapons, armor, personal items, all displayed in deliberate patterns. It looked almost ritualistic. "Psychological warfare," Ambassador Reynolds explained. "Nobody ordered them to do this. They did it instinctively. They were marking territory and demoralizing the enemy through displays that showed they were not afraid. That they were not just defending anymore. They were hunting." Dr. Foster pulled up another video. This is from week 10. By this point, the Krith raiders were trying to withdraw. They had given up on taking the station and just wanted to escape. Watch what happens. The footage showed the final assault. The Marines attacked the raider positions with suicidal aggression. They advanced through fire that should have pinned them down. When one Marine was hit and fell, he got back up and kept moving forward. Another took an injury that should have been disabling but barely seemed to notice. The raiders broke and ran for their ships. The Marines pursued them across the landing pad, out into the open where they had no cover. Station command was shouting orders through the communication system. "All units fall back. Let them go. Do not pursue beyond the perimeter." The Marines ignored the orders. They chased the fleeing raiders toward the ships, firing as they ran. It took multiple repeated commands before they finally stopped, and even then they stood at the perimeter watching the ships leave, bodies tense like leashed animals desperate to keep hunting. Dr. Foster stopped the footage. 3 Marines had to be physically restrained by their own squad mates. They wanted to pursue the raiders into space. Without suits. Without ships. They just wanted to keep going. The conference hall was absolutely silent. Several of the alien observers had changed color, their species equivalent of distress or fear. "After the conflict ended, we conducted extensive psychological interviews," Dr. Foster continued. "The Marines remembered the early weeks clearly. But weeks 8 through 10 were hazy. They described feeling disconnected from their own actions. One Marine said it felt like watching someone else control his body. Another said the clearest memory he had was the feeling of hunting, of tracking prey, and everything else was just fog around that central drive." She brought up brain scans again showing the dramatic differences. This Marine, Corporal Andrew Chin, scored in the 95th percentile for empathy and emotional intelligence during his initial recruitment screening. During the conflict, his empathy centers showed almost no activity. After 3 months of recovery and therapy, his brain function returned to near baseline. But he voluntarily left military service. In his exit interview, he said he was terrified of what he might become if he ever deployed again. Ambassador Reynolds took over the presentation. "We've documented this pattern across hundreds of engagements. The timeline varies slightly depending on individual psychology and the intensity of the combat, but the transformation is consistent. After 6 to 8 weeks of sustained fighting, humans fundamentally change." She pulled up a comparison video showing the same soldier in 3 stages. Week 1 alert and verbal. Week 8 silent and intense. Week 12 after recovery back to normal but with something haunted in his eyes. The berserker state is not training. It's not a choice. It's an evolutionary survival mechanism that activates under specific conditions. Our ancestors survived on Earth because when threatened continuously, they could transform into relentless predators. That capability is still in our genetics. Still in our neurology. We've built civilization on top of it, but it's still there waiting. Dr. Foster added, and it cannot be fully controlled. We can prevent it by limiting combat exposure. We can manage it with psychological support and careful monitoring. We can help soldiers recover after it happens. But once it activates, we cannot simply turn it off. The person has to ride it out until the threat ends and their brain slowly returns to normal. Kelm stood again, his voice shaking slightly. Are you saying that every human has this inside them? Every one. Yes, Reynolds answered without hesitation. Every human who experiences sufficient prolonged combat stress will undergo this transformation. Some faster than others. Some more intensely than others. But it's not a defect in certain individuals. It's part of human nature. Threx spoke up, his earlier enthusiasm for combat stories completely gone. And you kept this classified because if the galaxy knew that humans have this capacity, they would see us differently, Reynolds said. Not as allies who happen to be good fighters. As potential threats who need to be watched carefully. As beings who carry something dangerous inside them that could emerge under the right circumstances. She gestured to the frozen image on the screen, showing a human marine's empty expression during the height of the berserker state. This is why we don't boast about combat. This is why we don't share war stories. Because those stories would reveal what we become. And we're ashamed of it. Terrified of it. We know that underneath every human's civilized exterior is something that could transform them into this. Dr. Foster closed the presentation files. There's more footage if you want to see it. Dozens of engagements. Hundreds of hours of documentation. But it all shows the same thing. Humans in prolonged combat stop being the people they were and become something else. Something efficient and dangerous and barely recognizable. She looked out at the assembled crowd. The question now is what you do with this information. Do you continue training alongside humans knowing what they could become? Do you trust human soldiers in joint operations? Do you want humans stationed on your worlds or serving on your ships? In the back row, Laura sat with her head down. Around her, the other human cadets looked equally miserable. They had grown up knowing vaguely that there was something shameful in their military history, something that wasn't discussed. Now they understood exactly what it was. Ambassador Reynolds gave them all a moment to process everything they had seen. Then she spoke one final truth. We show you this not to frighten you but because you deserve honesty. Yes, humans have this capacity for transformation. Yes, it makes us dangerous under specific circumstances. But we also have the capacity for self-awareness. We know what we are. We know what we could become. And we build our entire military structure around preventing it, managing it, and ensuring it never gets unleashed without absolute necessity. She paused. The real question isn't whether humans are dangerous. Every species with military capability is dangerous. The question is whether you trust us to control that danger. To use it only when necessary. To be afraid of it the way we are. The lights came back up slowly. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. They were all trying to reconcile the friendly humans they knew with the transformed soldiers they had just witnessed on screen. And wondering if they could ever look at their human colleagues the same way again. The conference hall emptied slowly after the presentation ended. Nobody seemed eager to talk. The alien cadets moved in small groups, speaking in hushed tones. Several species who normally socialized freely with humans now kept their distance, casting uncertain glances at the human cadets. Laura walked back to her quarters alone. The corridors felt longer than usual, and the other students who passed her seemed to look away quickly. She had expected this. Once people understood what humans could become, everything changed. She found Kelm waiting outside their shared room. The massive Vraxian was sitting against the wall, his armored bulk taking up most of the corridor space. He looked up when she approached. I have been thinking, he said quietly. Everyone has been thinking, Laura replied. She unlocked the door and they went inside together. Kelm settled onto his reinforced bed while Laura stood by the window, looking out at the nebula. The view that usually calmed her offered no comfort now. I need to tell you something, she said finally. Something I've never told anyone here. You don't have to. Yes, I do. Because you deserve to understand why this isn't just classified information to me. Why it's personal. She turned to face him. My grandfather was a war hero. Commander Patrick Mitchell. He fought in the frontier conflicts 30 years ago. Received the highest military honors. Saved hundreds of lives. Came home to parades and ceremonies and grateful speeches. She sat down on her own bed. And he never, not once in his entire life after returning, spoke about what he did. My grandmother said he would wake up screaming sometimes. That he would sit in the dark and cry. That some days he couldn't look at himself in the mirror. Kelm listened silently. When I was 12 I asked him directly. Why wouldn't he talk about his service? Why did he seem so sad when everyone else treated him like a hero? Laura's voice grew thick. He looked at me with the most terrible expression and said, "Because I remember what I became, and I can never forgive myself for it." He died when I was 15. After the funeral, we found letters he had written but never sent. 3 pages, maybe more, all saying the same thing over and over. "I'm sorry for what I became. I'm sorry for what I did. I'm sorry that part of me enjoyed it." Just variations of those words, filling page after page. A tear rolled down Laura's cheek. That's what humans carry. Not pride in our combat abilities. Shame that we have them at all. Shame that somewhere inside each of us is something that could transform us into efficient killers who feel satisfaction in the hunt. Kelm moved to sit beside her, his massive frame somehow gentle. But he saved lives. He protected people. That matters. Does it? If the cost of saving lives is becoming someone you hate? Someone you can't recognize? Laura wiped her eyes. That's why humans don't boast about combat. It's not modesty. It's not cultural. Shame. Deep, terrible shame about what fighting reveals about our nature. There was a long silence. Outside, a patrol ship drifted past the window, its lights blinking steadily. The rules of engagement, Laura continued, all those ethical protocols, the psychological screening, the rotation schedules, the mandatory therapy. Other species think we're being careful about how we treat enemies. But that's not it. We're being careful about what we let ourselves become. Those rules aren't to limit what we do to others. They're to limit what war does to us. Kelm thought about this carefully. So humans avoid prolonged wars not because you cannot win them. Exactly. We avoid them because we're terrified of what we become when we fight them. We know that given enough time under combat stress, every human soldier will transform into something they'll spend the rest of their life trying to forget. That is why the classification exists. Yes. Because if other species knew this about us, they wouldn't see humans as allies anymore. They would see us as threats. As beings carrying something dangerous that could emerge under the wrong circumstances. And they would be right to see us that way. Kelm was quiet for a long time. Then he said something that surprised Laura. "I think you are wrong." She looked at him questioningly. The presentation today was frightening, yes. The footage was disturbing. But what frightened me most was not what humans become in combat. He met her eyes directly. What frightened me was realizing that humans know what they are capable of and are terrified of it themselves. That you build your entire military structure around controlling something inside you. That you carry this burden of knowing what you could become. I don't understand. Every species has capacity for violence. My people, the Vraxians, we pride ourselves on our warrior traditions. We celebrate strength and aggression. But we have never questioned whether that strength makes us dangerous to others. We have never looked inward and feared what we might find there. Kelm's voice was thoughtful. Humans do. You know exactly what you are capable of and it terrifies you. That self-awareness, that fear of your own nature, that is not weakness. That is strength. Laura wanted to argue but couldn't find the words. The Marine in the video, Kelm continued, the one who left military service because he was afraid of what he might become again. That shows incredible courage. Not the courage to fight. The courage to admit fear of yourself and choose to step away. He stood and moved back to his own bed. Your grandfather wrote those letters because he understood what he had done and felt remorse for it. Another being might have felt only pride. But humans feel shame. You don't boast about combat because you understand its true cost. There was a knock at the door. Laura opened it to find Instructor Velki standing in the corridor, his compound eyes reflecting the room lights. "May I speak with you both?" he asked. They invited him in. The Torvan instructor settled into a resting position, his 6 legs folding beneath him. "The senior staff has been meeting," he said, "discussing the implications of what we learned today. Several species have raised concerns about continuing joint training with human cadets." Laura felt her stomach drop. "You're removing us from the academy." "No. Quite the opposite." Velki's voice carried warmth. "We are implementing new protocols based on what humans already do. Psychological monitoring for all cadets. Mandatory rotation schedules. Ethical training focused on self-awareness rather than just following orders." "I don't understand." "Humans have been managing this challenge for generations," Velki's explained. "You have developed methods to monitor combat stress, to prevent the transformation, to help soldiers recover when it does occur. These methods work. And they could benefit all species, not just humans." He gestured with one leg toward the window. "Every species in this academy has combat capabilities. Every species can become dangerous under the right circumstances. But only humans have systematically studied this danger and built comprehensive systems to control it. We should learn from that. Kelm nodded slowly. You are saying the problem is not unique to humans. The specific mechanism may be unique, but the underlying challenge is not. Any being trained for violence carries the risk of that violence becoming uncontrolled. Humans simply understand this better than anyone else because you have looked directly at your own capacity for darkness. Velky stood to leave, then paused at the door. I asked you why humans don't boast about combat, Cadet Mitchell. Now I understand. You don't boast about strength you fear. You don't celebrate victories that cost pieces of your soul. That is not weakness. That is wisdom. After he left, Laura and Kelm sat in silence for a while. Finally, Kelm spoke. Will you tell me more about your grandfather? Not about his service. About who he was after. How he lived with what he knew about himself. Laura smiled sadly. He was kind. Incredibly kind. He volunteered at veteran support groups. He spent time with young soldiers preparing for deployment, warning them about what they might face. He dedicated his life to helping others avoid or cope with what he had experienced. He turned his shame into purpose. I suppose he did. He couldn't undo what he became during the war, but he could use that knowledge to help others. He could make sure that the suffering he went through had meaning. Kelm considered this. That is what humans do, isn't it? You cannot change your nature, so you work constantly to channel it toward something good. To use your dangerous capabilities only when absolutely necessary and to minimize the damage they cause to everyone, including yourselves. We try. We don't always succeed, but we try. That is all any species can do. The next morning the academy felt different. The awkwardness remained, but it was mixed with something else now. Curiosity. Respect. Several alien cadets approached the human students with questions about psychological screening methods, about how to recognize combat stress, about recovery protocols. Threx found Laura in the cafeteria. The large Crevathi looked uncomfortable but determined. I wanted to apologize, he said. I spent weeks theorizing about secret weapons and tactical advantages. I made it into a mystery to solve. But it was never about tactics. It was about people struggling with something difficult. You couldn't have known. No, but I should have listened when you said some doors are better left closed. I pushed anyway because I was curious. I am sorry. Laura accepted the apology. They talked for a while about his culture's approach to combat stress, and she was surprised to learn that Crevathi warriors also struggled with the aftermath of violence, though in different ways. Over the following weeks, the academy began implementing new programs. Psychological wellness became a mandatory part of training for all species. Instructors started teaching not just how to fight, but how to recognize when fighting was changing you. How to seek help. How to recover. The human cadets found themselves in unexpected roles as advisors and teachers. They shared what their species had learned through painful experience. They helped other cadets understand that strength wasn't just about winning battles. It was about knowing yourself well enough to control when and how you fought them. One evening, Laura stood before a mixed group of cadets giving a presentation on combat stress recognition. As she spoke about warning signs and coping mechanisms, she realized something. Her grandfather's suffering hadn't been meaningless. Her own struggle with shame about human nature wasn't pointless. By being honest about what humans feared in themselves, they were helping others avoid similar darkness. By refusing to boast about combat, they were teaching the true cost of violence. By building systems to control their dangerous capabilities, they were showing that self-awareness and restraint were greater strengths than raw power. After the presentation, Kelm walked with her back to their quarters. Your grandfather would be proud, he said. You took the shame he carried and transformed it into something that helps others. Laura thought about that. Maybe that's what humans do best. We can't change what we are. We can't eliminate the darkness inside us. But we can choose how we respond to it. We can choose restraint over excess. We can choose awareness over denial. We can choose to protect others from ourselves. That, Kelm said quietly, is the real reason to honor human warriors. Not because of what they can do. Because of what they choose not to do. They reached their room and stood in the doorway for a moment, looking out at the nebula that painted the darkness in beautiful colors. Do you think, Laura asked, that other species will ever truly trust humans now that they know? I think they will trust you more, Kelm replied. Because now they understand that humans trust themselves least of all. And any species wise enough to fear their own power is a species worth standing beside in battle. Laura smiled. It wasn't forgiveness for what humans were capable of becoming. It wasn't erasure of the shame her grandfather had carried. But it was understanding. And perhaps that was enough. In the darkness outside, stars burned with ancient light. And inside the academy, humans and aliens trained together, working to understand not just how to fight, but how to remain themselves while doing it.